Okay, so we're sort of all over the place tonight as far as topics. First, we're going to briefly touch on wealth, possessions, things like that. If you've been here and through the Bless series and things like that, when we were in it with Luke, I don't know, 4 months ago, a lot of things will ring a bell. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on it. Let me make sure this works. Okay. So this quote is from Counterculture by David Platt. We used it as a study with the college young adult group, but it is really a great read. Any kind of topic today, all the way from wealth to race to homosexuality, like how do we handle these things as believers? So I would definitely recommend picking that up. And if you're in a small group and if you have access to Right Now Media with the church, you can get that study and do it as a group together. It's really great. So this quote says, "The Bible's teachings should cut to the heart of North American Christians. By any measure, we are the richest people ever to walk on planet Earth. Furthermore, at no time in history has there ever been greater economic disparity in the world than at present. While the average American lives on more than $90 a day, approximately 1 billion people live on $2 a day. And what is the task of the church? We are to embody Jesus Christ by doing what he did and what he continues to do through us. Declare, using both words and deeds, that Jesus is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who's bringing in a kingdom of righteousness, justice, and peace. And the church needs to do this where Jesus did it, among the blind, the lame, the sick, the outcast, and the poor." So this is sort of going along with what Anthony talked about a little bit today too, but grab your Bibles. We'll just mainly be in them at the beginning as we're talking about this subject, and then most of the things are going to be on your verse sheet. But go to Matthew 6. We're going to look at verses 19 to 24. And we talked about this before, so a little quiz question. What is Matthew 6? What's happening? Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is giving one of his typical talks that he would do, but we see it in Luke with the Bless series. Luke repackaged it from Matthew's version of it, but there's so much good stuff in it. So verses 19 to 24, it's just before the worrying section that we talked about a couple weeks ago. But Jesus says here, "Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." So what are some of the takeaways here that Christ warns about with money? Can't take it with you when you die? Okay, it can be taken from you. Don't let it be your focus. Are you getting that from 21? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then a pursuit of money is done in opposition to God when he talks about you can't serve both God and money. This passage in 1 Timothy on your verse sheet gets into it a little bit more. We won't do it right now, but right on here, I really should have started at verse 6 of 1 Timothy chapter 6 and go into verse 10. Paul is talking about false teachers, essentially. He's warning Timothy about them who are basically going to preach things just for monetary gain. So they're all about, the kingdom on the outside, but they're really doing it for wrong motives so that they can gain gain wealth, gain material things. And this is where you've probably heard the verse, godliness with contentment is great gain. So that's kind of the setting for this. But he says here, those who are rich, desire to be rich, fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. What are some of the warnings here? Desiring riches leads to temptation and to getting trapped and ultimately destruction. I'm sure we can sit here and name a lot of crimes that have been committed for the love of money. Somebody going after money and they murder somebody else who has it. They steal something from somebody else. That's very telling there, just what Paul says, that the love of money is the root of so many other evils that can manifest because of that desire just for more and more and more. James 5 there on your sheet. He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days." Sorry, y'all. My head is saying another version, and it's not what's on the sheet. So here, James, which, by the way, I may have mentioned it before, James was Christ's half-brother, so he would have heard a lot of the times when Jesus preached. If you kind of look through the book of James and compare it to the Sermon on the Mount, there are a lot of similarities. So he's probably saying some of this thinking about what we just read from Matthew 6. What are a couple of the warnings he throws out here? He's saying riches aren't going to last. Just like what Bo said earlier, we can't take them with us. What does he mean by you have laid up treasure in the last days? Yeah. And we are even said right now, if the New Testament authors said that those were the last days, we are in the last days. And if we are pursuing monetary things and storing that up when we should be talking about Christ, sharing our faith, there's a warning there to us that we're wasting our time, that we're going to be judged for that. Proverbs 11, next two on your sheet, verses 4 and verse 28. It says, "Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. Whoever trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like a green leaf." So Solomon is saying here, riches are not going to profit. They're not going to do you any good when it comes to the day of judgment. They're not going to deliver you from death. They're not going to last. Solomon we know he was the wisest man. God gifted him with wisdom, but he was also one of the richest men ever. So for him to be able to say things like this is really important. And then Luke 6, Jesus says, "Woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation." So again, just, if you're living for being rich now on the earth, great, enjoy it, because destruction is coming for eternity. And then Luke 12, Jesus says, "Take care, be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." That, to me, I was watching, I don't know what it was, some commercial. I can't remember. Maybe Target. And then I was watching a Food Network show earlier. Sorry, this has a point, I promise. And they were just talking about, it's Christmas and it's a time for excess and just, being lavish and all these things. And this just popped into my head, like, how much of our culture tells us that our life does have to do with the abundance of what we have. And not even just monetarily, but just anything. Like, you see it all over social media. It's obviously in commercials. It's just we're fed. And then, I look at how parents give kids just, and I'm not a parent, so I'm sure there's a huge temptation to do that, but just, stuff all the time. I have family members that have several kids, and they literally have so many toys and things, and I'm just like, they play with it once and it goes away, but yeah, they're going to get more and more each year for their birthday, for Christmas, and that just breeds a mindset. We just get that in our heads from a very young age, that my life is about the things that I have, and Christ is saying here, it is completely the opposite. All right, let's look at a couple more verses here. 2 Corinthians, this is Paul talking, and he says, "The point is this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. You'll be enriched in every way to be generous in every way, which through us will produce thanksgiving to God." There's a lot here. Paul is talking about generosity and how when we are genuine in our generosity, it doesn't just have to be with money, it can be with time too, then there's blessing that follows that, not just for yourselves, but for the others that you're being generous to. Leviticus 27, this is where we get some of the principle of tithing. It says, "Every tithe of the land, whether of the seed, of the land, of the fruit, or the trees, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. If a man wishes to redeem some of his tithe, he shall add a fifth to it. And every tithe of herds and flocks, every tenth of animal, of all that pass under the herdsman's staff, shall be holy to the Lord." So a tithe was just a tenth of the possession, of the wealth of the people of Israel. And for us today, I know I had, growing up, your parents give you an allowance. At least, I grew up in church, and it was okay, give, whatever a tenth of that was. Put it in an offering plate on Sunday. So it was great. They were teaching me that, and that's very important. But then when it came to like my actual money when I was in high school and I was working, and I wasn't having to support myself or do anything, but there was such it's the flesh, it's being fallen. There was such a selfishness to, I don't want to give up any of my money and thinking of it as mine. This is what I've worked hard for. This is what I've done. And when we do that, we miss out, number one, on a blessing, and we're not following through on passages like Leviticus. But we have a bigger misunderstanding of, this is ultimately the Lord's. He has allowed me to have this. He's given this to me. He's enabled me to be able to work to earn this money. And we shouldn't hold on to it with such a tight grip, because it's ultimately all the Lord's. Luke 6 there. This is again from the Sermon on the Plain in Luke. Jesus says, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use it will be measured back to you." This is, again, just about generosity. Proverbs here. Proverbs are good to remember that they are truisms. I think we've talked about this, but so not everything like these verses we'll read, not everything that Proverbs says means, okay, this is definitely going to happen. If you do this, then this will happen. They're not promises. They're truisms. They're what are generally most likely going to be the case. So Proverbs 10, 2-4, and then verse 22 says, "Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. And a slack hand causes poverty, but a hand of the diligent makes rich. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it." So again, verse 22 there, the blessing of the Lord makes rich. Okay, yes, you may be rich with possessions or with money, but it may also be in other ways. It may be with relationships. It may be with your abilities, things that you're able to do for the Lord. This isn't necessarily, this isn't the prosperity gospel up here. If you follow Jesus, he's going to bless you and make you rich. Ecclesiastes. Did we skip? Hello. Yes. Wow. I can't read. Proverbs 13:4 says, "The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied." And then 22:2 y'all. Okay, pause. I got up at 5:30 this morning. I've never had to do that on a Sunday morning. Bo's looking at me like I have to do that every Sunday. I'm struggling. Okay, I'm struggling. All right, back on. Proverbs 22:4-9. "The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor." Then we have Solomon again. He writes so much on wealth and possessions. So in Ecclesiastes 5, he writes, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money." I think people generally think the opposite of that. If I love money, I'm just going to keep doing more and more to get more and more. But Solomon, who had more money than anybody is hardly ever going to realize, he says, "Whoever loves money will not be satisfied with it, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is the father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. And as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This is also a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind?" So again, you see this theme throughout Scripture of don't pursue earthly things. You can't take them with you. It just distracts you from the call of living for the Lord completely in every area of your life. Okay, we're totally switching gears. We're done with the verse sheet. We're going to look at a couple sort of bigger passages on the screen. If you can't see them, some of them I had to make the font smaller just to fit it all on there. So just go to it in your Bibles. But we're going to talk about kind of evangelism now, and then we're going to look at other world religions and talk a little apologetics, sort of. This is, I don't think the verse reference is on there. This is 2 Corinthians 5, verses 14-20. And just keep in mind as I read this is what Paul says about all believers, okay? Not just people with a seminary degree or on the church staff or whatever. This is all believers. He says, "For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he died for all, that those who live might live no longer for themselves, but for him for whom their sake died and was raised. From now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the ministry of the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ to be reconciled to God." Okay, there's a lot here. I feel bad for not spending more time on it. But let's just, starting in verse 14, let's just kind of pull out some of the main points that Paul is making here. When he says the love of Christ controls or compels them, he's talking about everything else he's about to say, they're compelled to do because of how they have been loved by Christ, or compelled to love others because of what Christ has done for them. So in verse 15, give me kind of the main point of that. Christ died so that so that we would no longer live for ourselves, but for him. So Paul, backing up again to 14, he's compelled to love others and to live for Christ because of what Christ has done for him. Verse 16, he talks about how basically he sees with new eyes. It says, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh. So, I don't know if y'all have had situations, but I can think of like stories of family members who, again, our family, we've all grown up in church. That doesn't matter a hill of beans. But talking about, well, so-and-so came into church today and the way they were dressed or blah, blah, blah. And, there's no mindset of, well, that person may not be a believer. They may not know whatever, or being out somewhere and judging somebody what they're doing and not having a thought of, well, if that person's not a believer, then they're not gonna understand. They're not gonna do things like you think they need to do them because they don't know Christ. And this is kind of what Paul is talking about here. He's saying we don't regard anyone according to the flesh. We see with new eyes. There's patience there. There's an understanding that if somebody doesn't know Christ, they're not going to have all their ducks in a row when it comes to what the Bible says. And as believers, we need to be okay with that and not automatically judgmental and casting them aside and moving on to the next person we think is okay or perfect for us to be around. Verse 18, Paul says they have been given the ministry of reconciliation. Reconciliation, it should have been on your theological term sheet way back at the beginning. What's he talking about there? Reconciliation. Or just give me a basic definition of it. Okay. So two persons or parties were estranged and they're being brought back together. A relationship is being reconciled. Christ does that for us with God. That's nothing we can do on our own. It's only through Christ that we can be reconciled to God. So Paul says, since Christ has done that for him, he now understands and is compelled to help others be reconciled to God because of what, again, Christ has done. Verse 19, he talks about that they have been entrusted with this message. So it's not just we've been given the message, we're supposed to go out and share our faith, but we're entrusted to do something. We've been specifically given a task by the Lord. And trust is a really important word there. And then verse 20, this is a great verse to memorize. Therefore, we are ambassadors. So Paul, he starts out with therefore. So everything else he's just said that we've walked through, it's because of all that we are ambassadors for Christ. What's an ambassador? An official representative, somebody who is probably in a foreign land representing or on the behalf of, for instance, another country, another person. For us, the Bible tells us that we are strangers on the earth. We're foreigners. We are ambassadors here on behalf of Christ, given and entrusted with the message of reconciliation, with the gospel, with how people can be brought back to God. And this is all believers. Again, this is not just Chad, not just whatever pastor. This is something all believers are called to be. We're all called to be ambassadors. Let's look at Romans 10, verses 13 to 15. So this is Paul. He kind of talks a little odd here, but he does it to really drive home his point. He says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." That's a promise. "How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone telling them? And how are they to tell unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news." So it's kind of weird here. But he's talking backwards. Okay, so he should start out at the bottom and say, we're sent out to tell the gospel, to let others hear it who need to hear it so that they can believe it and they will call on the name of the Lord. But he does it backwards just to drive home his point that we are supposed to be about this. It's kind of a simple point to make, but we have to hear the gospel from someone else. Maybe we read the Bible and understood it, but for most of us, we're going to have heard it in a church service, from a friend, family member, whatever it is. Somebody had to share the gospel with us. And that, if nothing else, should be a motivation for us to share our faith and to talk to others about what we believe, just because people are not going to hear unless, like Paul says, they call, they believe, they hear because we told them, because we were sent. And I just added this on here. I think I probably quoted it before, so sorry if I have. If I have, you should remember it then. But it's from the Westminster Catechism. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's a great thing to tuck away in your brain. Basically, if we think that is true, if I understand my purpose in life is to enjoy God and glorify him forever, or as John Piper would say, in glorifying him forever, then I am going to want to bring others along with me. I'm going to want to share my faith, share the gospel, because if this is the chief end of man, if this is the purpose of life, I want as many people as I can help understand that purpose. Does that make sense? So just tying that in there. Just, if you don't remember anything else, no, this is one of the things. It's good to remember from the Westminster Catechism. Okay, one more little section of scripture here. It's from 1 Corinthians 9:19-23. Paul says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became one as outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings." So Paul he's basically saying, we contextualize the gospel. So if I have a friend who I know doesn't know church lingo, churchy words, isn't familiar with the Bible, for me to go and sit down and, say propitiation and justification, that is not contextualizing the gospel. That is making it hard on that person to understand because they don't know what those words are. So whatever the case may be, if you've got somebody that has been raised in church and thinks that they are a believer, then we have to contextualize the gospel to that person for where they are, to meet their needs and help them understand. We'll look at this more in detail when we talk about the other world religions. But this is it's really important. And I think Paul's example here is just very telling, because it's not that the gospel message can't save. I'm not saying that. But when you have a relationship with somebody, when you participate in relational evangelism, then you know kind of where they're at. You know their struggles, and you know how to fit the gospel to match where they are, if that makes sense. So this is what Paul is saying. I don't know about y'all, but I didn't grow up hearing stuff like this. We did visitation. Anybody else? Yeah, visitation? Okay. All right. So one thing that I loved, not really, was every Tuesday night, and I was in high school, we would go to UT, we go down the strip and have like 15 tracts. And we were not supposed to come back until we handed out our tracts. And oh my gosh, I just think about doing that now, and I'm like, Lord, please let nobody remember my face or anything. Because I'm walking up to this person that I have no idea what their name is. I have no relationship with them. And I try and talk them through a track. How impersonal and gosh, it's just like, well, let me, make my little tick mark that I've given you my tract so that I can get back on the van and go back to church. Like, so bad. I would leave, this is embarrassing, I would leave, like, tracts in the bathroom at UT. There were these, it's like $1 million bill or whatever. A tract is a piece of paper or a booklet or something that has a gospel message in it, but also kind of maybe a clever story in it or whatever. But so this one thing looked like $1 million bill, I think it was. And so I would like tuck it in between the seats in places like study room or whatever, like a little sticking up, thinking, oh, somebody's going to think this is a real dollar and they're going to pull it out and they're going to read it and they're going to become a Christian. Like, so bad. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I got baggage from my past with the church, if you can't tell. Okay. Moving on, perspective on the world. I just wanted to go through some of this stuff, talk a little bit about persecution, just because in America, we need perspective on this stuff. We are not faced with this on a regular basis. We hear it and we're like, oh, that's awful, and it breaks our hearts, and then we go and we forget about it. So these are just good numbers to have. And make sure, if I don't tell you where I got these from, because they're not on the slides, then make sure I say that. This first slide is from joshuaproject.net. So basically 140 million orphans, 150 million street children, which there's got to be some overlap there. 1 billion slum dwellers, 1.5 billion people live on less than $1.25 a day. And in the last hour, 72 people have been sold into slavery, 869 have died from hunger, and 1,250 have died from preventable diseases. And just in the last, 6 months to a year, as sex trafficking has become more apparent and more people are becoming aware of it and what it is and what it looks like, I think that 72 people sold into slavery in the last hour, I think that's way higher. Just with that horrible thing that goes on with sex trafficking. Then you've got persecution. So Christian persecution is any hostility that somebody experiences because of their faith in Christ. Some of the top 10 nations for just the most horrible persecution: North Korea, which it's ironic to me that the number one nation for persecution against Christians is not a Muslim nation. Now, certainly there are many on the list, but North Korea is atheist, and they top the list. Then you've got Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, Iran, Libya. We're familiar with a lot of these. It's illegal in these countries to be Christian, to own a Bible, to share your faith, to convert. That's part of why persecution happens, because people convert, people get a Bible, it's found out, and they're punished, killed, tortured, whatever, for their faith. This verse from Hebrews is just a great reminder for us in America who don't have to face these things, really. The author of Hebrews says, "Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering." This stuff is from OpenDoorsUSA.org. Voice of the Martyrs is also a great resource. They send out a monthly newsletter, and if you just have a little donation, they'll send it to you for free. But it's great just to have perspective on, praying for specific pastors, praying for specific people who are facing persecution all the time. Every month, 322 believers are killed. And I'd say the last time I did this, these numbers have probably changed. 214 churches or Christian properties are destroyed, and there are 722 violent acts against believers. There are more than 65 persecuted nations, which is over 75% of the world's population. Like, that's insane. That's really insane. This stuff is from Finishing the Task and then Voice of the Martyrs as well. And I think it's, I should have looked before saying this, but I think it's Finishing the Task, where you can go and you can look at every country and see, okay, this is a percentage of believers that are there. They have the Jesus film. They have a church plant. They don't have anything. And actually, we should have talked about this slide before saying that, but there are 16,000-ish different people groups in the world. 6,600 of those are unreached, which is about 3 billion people. Unreached is when you've got less than 2% of Christians in the population group. And then almost 6,000 of those are unreached and unengaged, which means there's no active Christian in the community. There's no current church planting effort. There's no gospel, little to no gospel access there. So in some of these places, you might have, if the Jesus film has been translated into whatever language, then they're working to get the Jesus film there. Christian radio is a huge thing in third world countries, especially. Getting Christian radios in communities. That's one way that I've heard different people talk about. I came, especially in Africa, I came to Christ because of what I heard on the radio. 86% in these areas are Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu. And then that stat on 160,000 martyrs every year. It's insane. A lot of this too has come from Secret Church. Has anybody ever done that with David Platt? So I didn't bring my book. I'll go ahead and mention the next part that we're going to move to on these world religions came from the last Secret Church that David Platt did. Secret Church is basically a 6-hour drinking from a fire hydrant thing where you have a booklet and you try to keep up with David Platt, who was pastor at Brook Hills, but now he's over the IMB. It's awesome. It is a wealth of information, and every year they do one or two, and it's always on a different topic. This year, or this coming year, I think it's in April, it's going to be on, I should have written it down. America and how we handle, essentially his sort of the counterculture stuff I mentioned earlier by him, but how we handle different issues like political things like homosexuality. So it'll be very interesting. It'll be a great resource. But what I'm going to do, I didn't want to send you all the Secret Church thing before I talk to you about it. But tomorrow I'll send y'all everything from the last Secret Church. This is what we're about to go over. And I didn't want to do it before because I thought somebody's going to print it out and it's probably 200 pages. But it's a great resource to keep, because if you know people that are going to fit these categories we'll talk about, it's huge for you to be able to share your faith with them. So let's jump in here, talk about world religions. Christianity currently is the largest world religion with 1.9 billion adherents, and who knows how accurate that number is. In 206 countries, it's a monotheistic religion, so it's belief in one God. It's based on the Bible and based on Christ. Islam is the next biggest religion, 1.7 billion people in about 150 countries. It is also monotheistic, based off the Quran and off the teachings of Muhammad. I'll go there in a second. There are 5 pillars of the Islamic faith with 6 basic beliefs. 5 pillars are things that Muslims do for Allah to maybe accept them, essentially. So it's going to Mecca. It's 5 prayers a day. It's fasting. Christianity is the only religion based on grace. Okay, all these other ones that we're going to talk about, it's all, I'm doing this, this, and this, and maybe I will achieve salvation, whatever salvation is for these religions. But a Muslim can be a great and perfect Muslim their whole life and never have any assurance of, is Allah going to accept me? Unless they participate in jihad. Muhammad, he was their prophet. He claimed to receive various revelations from Allah. He wrote here, "By Allah, though I am an apostle of Allah, yet I do not know what Allah will do with me." So this is the number one guy for Islam saying he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know how Allah is going to treat him. To them, they don't think that versus Christianity. Christianity believes we are fallen, we are sinful, we can do nothing apart from Christ. A Muslim would regard humans as just being weak. We just need to be educated. We need to be taught in the ways of Islam. We need instruction. We need to convert to Islam, basically. Our belief in the Trinity, they consider a complete heresy because they're monotheistic. They think Western culture is incredibly immoral, and Christianity is associated with Western culture. So that's why we see the things we do with persecution in so many different forms against Christianity, especially. Not just Christianity. You got atheism, which, yes, it's classified as a religion. 1.6 billion people, which is incredible, in 110 countries. Being agnostic, so not really, kind of maybe there's probably not a God, don't really know, don't really care. That's brought in under these numbers too. It's a belief system in denying the existence of God or gods. Basically, I think it's impossible for me to know if there's a God, so I'm just moving on with my life. All this leads to moral relativism. We've talked about this before. If there's no God, if there's no standard of morality or truth, then as our culture changes, as we evolve, so do our morals and what is true for us. That evolves too, because we're getting smarter, we're getting better. So all these things can change. A Reason for God by Tim Keller is a great book. If you have an atheist friend, the biggest thing with atheists, I can't say this really, not based on experience at least, but to a lot of people, Christians are dumb, especially Southern Christians. And so an atheist, typically, there's an intellectualism there. And just having honest, humble dialogue with an atheist can be huge. Not, I'm going to disprove you and blah, blah, blah. But, and Platt talks about this, and Keller does too, but getting them to talk and then finding where you can poke holes in the things they believe or the lack of belief, like creation. I always have, whenever anybody talks about creation, you think about, okay, nothing comes from nothing, nothing ever could. That's what I think about, and which is from The Sound of Music. So if I was ever to talk to an atheist, that would be one thing I would come around to, and Platt brings that up in the Secret Church literature. But it's just, what do you do with creation? How did everything come about? If there's nothing, nothing can come from nothing. Okay, we won't get into that. You read about it in the book. I'm no expert. Hinduism, Buddhism, the next two, I know very little. Basically, anything goes with these two religions, in a sense. There's 915 million-ish people who are Hindus. You get the culture of the caste system from this religion. It's in 51 countries. There are multiple beliefs. It's really hard to pin down Hinduism. There's reincarnation, and then salvation is being liberated from the reincarnation or the cycle of it. They are pantheists, so everything's a god. They are polytheists. They have multiple gods, and it's practiced however they want. So, literally, it's really hard to pin down what Hinduism is. They have tons of sacred writings. It's just a mixture, a conglomeration of different religious ideas, different ways to practice it, different cultural beliefs. So you could have various places in India. Hinduism could look different depending on where you are, for instance. There's 330 million different gods. The hopelessness of these next two, Hinduism and Buddhism, when I was doing the Secret Church, there were a lot of quotes from Hindu leaders and things like this, and everything was just so hopeless. I was just really struck by that. And basically, Hinduism teaches that unlike Christianity, humanity's problem, everything is spiritual for humans. Buddhism, again, hard to peg down. Not as hard as Hinduism, but 250 million people in 62 countries. So the followers of Buddha, or the enlightened one, basically salvation is finding a cure from suffering. They have different meditations, different mantras. Everything is about eliminating selfishness, because selfishness leads to suffering. So they have 4 noble truths, and they all revolve around different aspects of suffering. And they have an 8-fold path, and then that is how you liberate yourself from evil desire, which is selfishness, which ultimately leads to an escape from suffering. So you can sort of see a sin aspect there and how that's kind of biblical in a lot of ways. This quote here, I didn't write it down. It's from some Buddhist, but gone to never return, asleep to never awake. There is no resurrection. There is no escape. Like, what? Like that's your belief system? Man, it's just heartbreaking. I had my little cousin's kids, and we went to an Asian restaurant, and they'll have the offerings if it's a Buddhist place, and there were oranges up there, and it was this little golden Buddha, and its hand just kept moving, and my cousin's kid was like, "What? Why are there oranges up there?" And I didn't really explain it very well, but basically his takeaway was, they're just going to go bad. Like, that thing is not going to eat the oranges. And I probably told him things that he didn't understand, but it's okay. All right, animism. Animism is a folk religion. So it's kind of passed down orally. It's a lot of traditions. It's a belief that there are non-human entities that are spiritual essences with no separation between the spiritual and physical world. It's not a formal religion. Everything's spiritualized. And you see animism come about in every other religion, even Christianity. So like, say, I don't know, say I'm leaving tonight and I fall and cut my arm or something. If I have the thought, gosh, what did I do to deserve that? That's animism. And I know, I think Christians think that way a lot of times. The karma thought, now granted, that's weaved into other religions too, but kind of, and we see it in Scripture too, in the Gospels, when there's a man that's born blind, and the religious leaders are asking, what did he do, or how did his parents sin to cause him to be born blind? That is kind of the thought on, I must have done something, I must have angered the spirits, and bad things are happening to me. It's interesting how that weaves in with all the other ones. By 2050, these are horrible statistics. Whoa, we are flying. Look at this. Oh, my goodness. All right, by 2050, Muslims will equal the same number of Christians. Buddhists are going to remain the same. Hindus and Christians grow with the population, whereas Muslims grow twice as fast. In 2050, Islam was the largest religion held by those who were 15 and under, whereas Christians were 60 and above, the largest religions. The population rate on average is, the fertility rate on average is 2.5. Christianity is 2.1, but Muslims are 3.1. And then the Christian population is at a 35% growth rate, but Muslims currently is at 73%. That is insane. It's complete domination, world takeover, essentially. Christians will experience the largest net loss by 2050, with 40 million converting to Christianity. Again, these numbers are debatable. 106 will leave the Christian faith. Okay, if that's the case, were they ever really believers to begin with? So these numbers, you can kind of parse through them a little bit. But basically, this is not good for Christianity. And then the United States, we'll see a decrease of 78% Christians to 66. Privatized faith is a toxic belief in our American culture. I don't know who said that. Sorry for having that in there without it being a direct quote, but I didn't say that. Throughout church history, when there has been persecution or opposition to the church, that's when the church becomes the most pure. So you don't have nominal Christians walking around just because it's culturally acceptable or it's going to benefit them, whatever, in society to be labeled as a Christian. So if we were to experience persecution on a different degree in America, that could be good for the church. If you look at China and Africa, Christianity is growing like crazy, way more than the United States. There are so many Chinese and African missionaries that come here to the United States. I don't remember that exact statistic, but that was one thing David Platt said, and I was floored. This is why verses like 2 Corinthians 5 about us being ambassadors is so important, because not just do we have people around us, our neighbors, our friends and family who aren't believers, but we also have the nations coming to America in the form of so many refugees from so many countries. We can literally fulfill the Great Commission in Acts 1:8 from Knoxville, essentially. I wanted to finish with this quote from Jonathan Edwards, then we're going to do one more thing. Jonathan Edwards was a part of the Great Awakening in the 18th century in New England. Incredible theologian. He said, "When you look forward, you will see along forever a boundless duration before you, which will swallow up your thoughts and amaze your soul, and you will absolutely despair of ever having any deliverance, any end, any mitigation, any rest at all. You will know certainly that you must wear out long ages, millions and millions of ages, in wrestling and conflicting with this almighty, merciless vengeance. And then you will have done so. When so many ages have actually been spent by you in this manner, you will know that it is all but a point to what remains." So he's talking about hell. For us who are believers, to hear just the scripture that we've heard tonight, let alone the other commands in the New Testament about going and telling others, and then to know that this quote is reality for people who die without Christ. Like Paul says, we should be compelled and controlled by the love of Christ to share our faith. So I wanted we'll end with this. And Bo, in a minute, do you care to turn off the video for me? I'll tell you why in a second. So this last thing that... Hello. Oh, wrong way. What? Do y'all have a final slide? Okay. All right. Well, whatever. So it would not be good to end this session tonight without helping you all think through how to share your story of how you became a Christian. I had to do this when I first started seminary. We had to condense it into 10 minutes. And we had to be strategic on what we said, how we said it, how we wove scripture through it, how we talked about the lessons we've learned through our lives. So I wanted to leave y'all with kind of helping you think through that stuff. But then just the other times I've done this class, I've been asked to share my story as an example. So it's good that we are 30 minutes early tonight. Not that it's going to take 30 minutes, it's going to take 10. But so will you turn that off? Thank you. So just this is not like these are some examples of suggestions of how to format your story. So if you were to go home and sit down and think about your life by sections of like 10 years or so. And then in each section, what were the formative events that happened in those sections? How did God speak to you through scripture in those times? What were the lessons that you learned in those sections of your life? And then, what evidence do you see God, looking back, how do you see God working through those times? And then the last thing is just